Hi, everybody. Brad Truax from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite trees, the aspen. Aspens often are confused with birch trees, but they're not a birch species at all. They're a deciduous tree that is often interspersed with evergreens in the forest. And they often grow in clusters or large clonal groves originating from a shared root system. As a result, you'll often see multiple trees in an area as opposed to birch trees, which you may see one or two and not a whole host of them. Aspens may be considered pioneer species because they quickly colonize a recently burned area or an area that's been bare due to natural disasters. And they need lots of sunlight and they prefer moist soil. They may grow up as high as 80 feet tall, but most of them are in the 50 to 60-foot range at maturity, and the trunks may be about 10 inches in diameter. The aspen leaves are heart shaped, and the key thing is that they flutter in the wind. In the fall, they become a spectacular yellow, and you can identify them from afar by their quaking. That's actually one of the few things that when you're driving in your car, you can do a species identification. They're bright yellow and they're wavering, they're quaking. Aspens in the east tend to live up to about 60 years, whereas those that are in drier conditions out in some of the western states may live as long as 200 years. So our aspens birch trees, well, we already told you they're not. Aspens are not birch trees, but they are often confused with birch trees. Birch bark peels off like paper, whereas the aspen bark is smooth, but it does not peel. And once again, when we talked about the quaking leaves, that's characteristic of aspen trees. That does not happen with birch trees. So the aspen leaves are flat and they're heart-shaped. You can see them over here. They're shiny green on the top and duller on the bottom, almost kind of a silvery color on the bottom. And they attach to branches with these long petioles, which are flat. And it's because they're flat that it allows the leaves to quake when they're exposed to a light breeze. And once again, particularly in the fall, they take on this beautiful yellow color, and you may see them quaking if the wind is blowing. So the aspen bark, again, superficially resembles the bark of white birch. It's smooth. It has horizontal black streaks. You can see them here. And it also has these black knots in several areas. But once again, it does not peel like birch bark peels. And if you see any vertical streaks in the bark, those probably are from either a bear's claws or from a deer's antlers. Aspens do have flowers at times. These are called catkins, and these are the dangling flower clusters that appear on aspen trees, usually in the early spring. And that's before the leaves have actually merged. Uh, Aspen has only female or male flowers on each tree. Once again, when we talk about this a little bit later, your clonal grove will all be of the same sex. So again, the grove may have all male trees or all female trees, but they don't mix together. The male flowers are brown catkins up to 12 centimeters long, and they turn yellow with pollen. The female catkins are smaller, and they're green, and they're shorter than the male flowers. And the female catkins develop into fruits after they get pollinated by the wind. They're very unique features of the aspens, which make them one of my favorites. Especially unique feature is that they grow all the time, even in winter. And beneath the thin white outer layer of bark is a thin green photosynthetic layer. And that allows the tree to create sugars and grow even once all the other deciduous trees have become dormant. A second unique feature, the clonal grove could really be considered as one tree. And that's because they propagate from a single root system. So they share all the trees share that same root. They all have the same appearance, and they all are of the same sex, and they're all genetically identical. So it's really interesting. You could actually consider a whole grove of aspens to be a single tree. And because they propagate from that root system, they can readily resprout after a fire has destroyed even all the above ground trunks of the aspens. So how do they propagate? So if all the aspens in a clone grove are the same sex, how do the aspens propagate? Well, they do produce millions of seeds, but the seeds really aren't very viable, and they seldom lead to any new aspens. Rather, they self-clone. What that means is that they propagate from the shoots of that underground root system. And some people have actually grown aspens by using root cuttings from those roots. So uses of the aspen. Aspen wood is not very good for as a building lumber. It's also not very good as firewood because it dries slowly. Perhaps its best industrial use would be for making pulp for paper products. But the real value of aspens is for wildlife. So what are the value of aspens for wildlife? They provide food for a variety of animals, including moose, black bear, beavers, porcupines, ruffed grouse, and a number of rodents. Beavers in particular are very fond of aspen. More on that later. It is the favorite food of the beaver, and they'll eat the bark and they'll store the aspen logs and branches under their lodges to be used as food in the wintertime. And caterpillars of many butterflies and moths will feed on the leaves of the aspen. And because aspens create sugars and grow in the winter when all the other deciduous trees are dormant, the green sugary layer provides necessary nutrients for species like deer and moose, or if you're out west, elk. So what about the beavers and the aspens? We already mentioned that beavers are very fond of aspirin. It's their favorite food. They'll eat the bark and they'll store aspen logs and branches under their lodges. Remember, in a typical beaver lodge, they have a cache of sticks and woody products that they keep underneath the water, actually outside the lodge, and they use that periodically for food during the winter time. And they also use aspen for constructing their dams and their lodges. So why are they so fond of aspen? Well, first of all, it's relatively short and easily digestible. We also noted that the aspens create those sugars and grow in the winter when the other deciduous trees are dormant. And because the aspens need sunlight and moisture, they tend to grow along the edges of the beaver pond. So the beaver actually has relatively easy access to them. And beavers can actually stimulate aspirin regeneration, both by cutting them down and restoring some of the hydrological function to the riparian areas. So once again, that's aspens, really a unique species. Hope that you've enjoyed this.